Many of us first met Paul Romer at this conference when he came here to speak. I think it was 4 years ago. 3 years ago when you first came here? 4 years ago. And he's been such an important addition to the Boston College community, and we're really grateful to have him here to do a fireside chat without a fire with Dean Andy Boynton. So many of you know Dean Boynton. As was said before, he's been a transformational dean here at Boston College. I can't believe it's been 20 years. I'm always proud of my affiliation with Boston College for everything it's done over that period of time. There's been a lot of controversy in higher education, and Boston College has avoided a great deal of it, and that's because of great leadership from people like Andy. He's also a pretty decent fisherman. He's actually wrote books about it, about fishing on the beaches in Nantucket.
That's the one thing I'm good at. I know how to catch striped bass on Nantucket Island. All this other stuff is, I dabble.
So I'll give a brief introduction to Paul Romer. So Paul Romer directs Boston College's Center for the Economics of Ideas. How important are ideas? He received the 2018 Nobel Prize in Economics for showing how different it is when an economy produces and distributes not just physical objects, but also ideas. With the right policies, ideas make...
Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, I was at a school in Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, I was at a school in Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best school in Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive in Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive Switzerland called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive education called IMD, which is in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the best executive education in the world, and it's a great place to live near Lausanne, Switzerland. So there with my colleague and friend Bill Fisher, who's been with me working as a colleague through several books. But I was at IMD. We were going to visit the industrial districts of Prato, Italy, because there was a famous book written, The Second Industrial Divide, by two MacArthur Prize winners at Princeton and MIT. And I contacted Paul Romer. He didn't know me. I said, they move ideas in this industrial district because they combine these firms and they specialize very effectively in a very custom flexible way. That was the thesis of this book where Peoria and Sable got their ideas. So I emailed Paul and he said, find out if the ideas are codified or really recipes, or is it just their experience? Now I know why he told me to find that out. So I've been reading him, and his work is very influential to the world of strategy and your companies. But that translation has not been made yet to the world of strategy, but it is. So listen carefully to what he says. Fast forward. 4 years ago, I wrote about Paul Romer in a book I co-authored with Bill called The Idea Hunter. He wrote a nice thing about the book. It's about ideas. He never had met me, but he still wrote a nice thing. On the back of the book, he endorsed it. And 4 years ago, we had him speak at this conference. And after the conference, it was great. And Ronnie Sotka, who I mentioned earlier, who never fails to try to get better, said, we should hire him. So the next day, I said to Paul, would you be interested in coming here? He was at NYU at the time. And he said he might be. So the next day, as I'm driving down to Hyannis to get the fast ferry to you-know-where, I'm on the phone with Paul for about 60 minutes, talking to him about his research and what we can do. The next day, I called David Quigley, the provost, and said, I think we can hire Paul Romer. And we did. We tried to hire his wife, too, who's an amazing scholar at Columbia in literature, French literature, and so forth. But we will someday. Paul lives in New York. He commutes back and forth. Now, two things. Been a great member of the faculty, great member of the finance department, But you should know this, and I'm not saying this because Paul's here. He's won bigger awards than anything I can say. BC is a great university. We're going to be a great university if we hire great faculty. They endure. Great universities have great faculty. This finance department, you're going to hear another one after lunch, a young man who's German, who thinks big ideas about the world, Paul Schmelzing. I could go through the whole lineup of my colleagues from finance here today. They're amazing scholars and, as I said, great teachers. Paul also teaches undergrads at BC. But you got to have great professors. Paul is academic royalty, Nobel laureate, BC's first. This is who we have to hire because your daughters and your sons deserve the best. When they take classes, and we have 600 students in the Carroll School who are research assistants or teaching assistants, they should be brushing up against the kind of people who are occupying those back tables, who are great faculty, Ronnie Sotka, and people like Paul Romer, because that makes them better as undergraduates. That's really our focus. We do great grad programs, but especially young people, 18 to 22. It changed many of your lives being here, and we wanted to change the lives of these kids here who are now here, who are a lot smarter than I was coming out of high school from Basking Ridge, New Jersey. You couldn't get me into BC now with a cannon. So my point is, it's not about Paul, what I'm saying. It's about the faculty we have in the room, the talent, the students. Ever to excel, BC has to get better, and hiring Paul Romer was a big step in that direction. And we should all just listen. Heck, we know he knows what he's doing. I can't speak about the economics, but other people have. He won a Nobel Prize. So this is part of a building block of BC, as is this conference every year. And your generosity collectively, whether you send your children here or whether you donate or give us is part of the fuel that drives us forward. And we really appreciate that. I couldn't have done what I did in the Carroll School, and it wasn't alone. It was people like, if he's in the back room, Hassan Turanian, who really started building this finance department, Ronnie Sotka, who accelerated it. It takes a village, but it takes money. No money, no vision. And thank you all for that. But it takes faculty talent. They endure. Students come and go. But the faculty, we want to keep them, and we attract the best. So a little bit of preamble about why I'm so excited to be here with Paul. It was quite an adventure to hire him here. And David Quigley was so supportive, the provost. Basically is, whatever it takes, let's do it. And that's the kind of attitude we have to have. You can jump, just don't disagree with me.
No, but before we start the official, everybody else has talked about their connection to BC. I'm not even sure if you know this, but I have 2 nieces who've attended BC.
I didn't know that.
I have a 3rd niece who's applying and may well apply right now. So one of the things I want to find out is there a quantity discount? But
the answer is no.
I'm one of 7 siblings.
That's
so
exciting. You got to tell me about this.
At the cousins level, we got a lot.
I want to hear more.
Potential candidates.
Michelle, make note of this.
And then the only other thing is that
I want to know what these nieces.
I'm big on evidence, and the one piece of evidence I have is that my wife says that I've never been happier in my job than I've been since I came to BC. So it's a sign of how this place is working. It has. How this place works and what it's like to work with somebody like Andy. There are some logistical costs coordinating back and forth between New York and Boston. I promise you, now that I've had my last teaching day this week, I am actually going to get a haircut in a week or two. But it's been hard to schedule when I'm on the train.
Well, sooner or later we're going to get back on track. But I met Paul's father, who I was interested in meeting. We had breakfast at Johnny's, last year. His father was the governor of Colorado, very progressive with some ideas, did things to really, and he ran schools around Los Angeles and renovated them. And when I listened to his dad, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You really see it, and it's great to get to know Paul, Caroline, his wife, and his dad. So welcome. It's great to be up here with you. We're done.
Okay.
All right, let's go. Let's go have lunch. So some of you heard this at breakfast, but I always am fascinated by it, Paul, is you were a young economist. You were choosing your direction You were a nobody, right? You were another another academic. I think University of Chicago PhD, which is the best PhD in economics. And Phil Strahan, I think, is one. He's on our faculty. It's the best, I think, PhD. And somebody could disagree. It's elite. And Paul was a student there. He had to figure out what he was going to do. And in other speeches, he's talked about how he saw the world getting better, predictions where it was getting worse, and that kind of presented him a puzzle. And I think that puzzle is what launched him forward. I'd like him to speak to that now. Paul, could you describe, you're coming out, what did you see? What catapulted you in terms of this world of economic growth? That's the PhD, economic growth and what drives economic growth, a big topic that everybody in business cares about, right? So this isn't some niche.
Yeah.
What drives economic growth in countries?
Well, so I mentioned at breakfast that my personality is such that I tend to be interested in things that are a little bit off the beaten track. There's a suggestion that when you're in a big family, and I'm like one of 7, the younger children have to be more rebellious and try wilder things to get attention. So maybe that explains what motivates me. But the other thing I was remembering is that when I went to graduate school starting in like 78, 79, this was a time of really deep pessimism about the future in the United States. And it resonates in some ways with the pessimism that we feel now for different reasons. The sources of this pessimism were, one, that we'd had this book, The Silent Spring. We saw the damage that DDT had done to the environment, and a very serious concern about steadily worsening environmental conditions. A book called The Population Bomb that said as we get more and more people, we're doomed to have mass starvation by the 1990s or something. And this was a kind of a present manifestation of a long history of thought in economics, which says things have to get worse because there's a fixed quantity of resources on Earth. There are more people. You have fewer resources per person. The arithmetic seems pretty kind of deadly that you're going to have lower quality of life as you get more and more people. But the historical record, it seemed clear, was one of, if you looked over centuries, not just like a few years, but over centuries, was one of progress that was speeding up, progress that got faster when there were more people. And there was no reason, I argued, to think that technological progress would stop or would falter. And so I was in this era of still widespread doom and gloom saying, you just got it wrong. The technology is going to make all kinds of things possible. Now, I think the record ex post shows that I was right. I mean, we have not suffered from technological stagnation. We've got all kinds of new things that we've figured out how to do, and it's that figuring out how to do things differently with a fixed body of resources, that's what makes progress. I describe to people the amplifier my father used to use to listen to music when I was a child. It had vacuum tubes that weighed 40 pounds, it radiated heat, it was this monstrosity. And just because of better ideas, we can now build amplifiers that you can carry in your pocket that run on battery and are at least as good in terms of the potential for amplification as those very heavy analog ones.
Paul, you mean progress also in healthcare, food area, broadly speaking, right?
Anything. Yeah. Just if we've got a fixed amount of resources, but we can learn how to get a lot more value out of a given quantity of resources by rearranging them, recombining them, finding new pharmaceuticals, finding new discoveries. So I was this this kind of lone voice at the time saying, no, the technology is going to be really fast. And I said, this is going to give us dramatic progress. Now, why haven't things turned out as well as I thought? We have to remember that progress in technology gives us possibilities. It's still up to us to use those for broad social benefit. Like we invented a class of chemicals, the chlorofluorocarbons, that were technologically really clever, and they were very useful in some applications. Turned out they were destroying the ozone layer. So fortunately, under the Reagan administration, we had a government which said, no, you can't, just because you're making money, you can't destroy the ozone layer. And so we banned the chlorofluorocarbons. We've lost our nerve a little bit about asserting that from the point of view of the public, that, yeah, okay, this is a technology you can do, but no, we're not going to let you do it if it's harmful. But if we regain our nerve on that front, we can count on lots of new technologies. If we say no to the ones that are going to be harmful, say yes to the ones that are beneficial, then we'll be fine.
So at the heart of that progress, at the end of it, many of us know the concept you introduced was to distinguish between ideas and objects.
Right.
Could you? So you see, I'm active listening. You see this progress, more healthcare. We're getting more food out of the same acreage. People aren't starving. Fertilizers are more effective. Irrigation is more. We're learning how to do many healthcare. People are getting older, despite fixed resources. Now, then enter the perilously close now to what you won the prize for, and your writing and your theory, where you distinguish between ideas and objects. Can you expand on that? Because that's at the core of it, and frankly, it's very accessible when we hear you speak about it.
Yeah. You think about like increasing seed yields. What are the ideas there? The ideas are actually DNA strings with some DNA variation across the different seeds. Some DNA strings actually take the atmosphere and the sun and are more effective at producing, and whatever nutrients are in the ground are more effective at producing the product that we want. Other strings are less effective, and so we just sampled. Let's like plant some more of the ones that are yielding a lot and fewer of the ones that are yielding less. So we worked indirectly on the underlying ideas, which are literally just sequences of DNA. The big revolution in our lifetimes is we've switched from, say, just like sampling pharmaceutical compounds from the jungle or selecting different seeds that do better for worse. With software, we're now writing the different codes. We're thinking about what code to write and writing codes that then through software gets implemented in physical transformations and then ultimately leads to products for us. So we're not just exploiting variation on ideas that are given to us by the biological universe. We're now writing the code, and we may soon be writing the DNA strings themselves and harnessing those biological production mechanisms, not just our physical ones. But just because I am this kind of, I always a little bit of a provocateur because I'm not always right in the mainstream. Let me be clear about what I think is the biggest policy mistake we've made. Analogous to we should have said no to X. I bet nobody in the room knows what it is. It's the advertising-based internet model. You cannot have a market that functions based on advertising. This is a huge mistake. The way the market works is you want to sell me something, I pay you, you give me what you sell, I see how I like it. If I like it a lot, I might buy it again. If I don't like it a lot, I go buy something else from somebody else. That's the way the market works. Bilateral exchange where there's mutual benefit. The advertising model is a trilateral scheme where a third party pays him to give me things that I don't want. And this third party payment scheme is just horrible. And if you look at the problems in our social discourse and why we can't get the message out about why free markets and democracy are good things, it's all because of the reliance on this stupid advertising model. And we as citizens need to think about, yeah, we could just say no. You can't make money that way, just like you can't make money selling chlorofluorocarbons. Now, people might think I'm wrong about how damaging it is, but at least we should be asking the question.
I want to come back to ideas again.
All right.
I want to use, and I'm going to, because it's key, it's the core of what you have thought about, is explain what an idea is versus an object. Maybe use the cake recipe example, why we can all share it. It doesn't deplete. I'm reading your article in my mind. Mm-hmm. And so just objects versus ideas, what's the difference, and how the ideas are the generative force to growth.
Yeah. You know, an example.
Good as the cake and the recipe.
An example I used to use that I'd forgotten and you
no.
reminded me about was an idea called cross-docking that was developed they're really exploited by people at Walmart. The idea used to be that you bring trucks up from the factory, you unload things like washing machines, take them off the truck, you park them in the warehouse. Later, some other trucks come up to the docks, and you load washing machines on those trucks, and those trucks go out to the stores. And you got to mix different products for each store. Cross-docking meant, why don't we see if we could not put the washing machine down after we pick it up with a forklift? You pick it up on one truck, and then you drive over to it, and you put it down in another truck. You know, it's just like a simple idea, but when you do that, you can save costs. You can reduce inventory that's sitting just in warehouses. You don't need warehouses anymore. And ideas like that, which were then exploited by something like Walmart, which delivered goods to people at much lower costs than they used to see. It's the deployment of those kind of ideas that cumulatively leads to progress.
And those ideas don't deplete. They can be recombined, yet raw materials we're competing for, and they end, right?
Yep.
And I want to just mention for the audience, Paul's an economist who talks about national growth, but he talks about cross-docking. So I'm a strategy professor. What I hear is Walmart had a recipe for cross-docking that no one else had in that industry. That idea was a formula. It was a process. They codified it. They knew what steps to do, and no one else had them. They could launch that recipe across every Walmart as they grew and gain efficiencies. So as a firm, that idea codified, that recipe gave them advantage over firms that didn't have the recipe. So that's strategy. But at a national level, Walmart's doing better, people adopt the idea, and so forth. So these ideas are flourishing, and they get to spread widely if they're not patents, especially. So it's that notion.
And so the cross-docking idea is an example of something where you had to create a culture where people were able to experiment with this. This meant reconfiguring buildings to try this experiment. But then when it worked, the way, if you're a really big organization like Walmart, the way you could scale it is by teaching this idea to everybody else. So there was a codification of the idea and then some kind of explanation of it so that other people can use it. Again, what's striking about software is that you can spread ideas much more quickly. Like if Google has an algorithm and a database of the sites all over the internet, they can just expand the number of servers and provide internet search service to 1 million people or 1 billion people by just adding more servers. So software has really sped up this possibility of taking something that's good and that's valuable and then reusing it over and over again without the kind of the slow process of teaching everybody how to do it and building the buildings.
It didn't take software. I mean, Henry Ford thought of the assembly line, codified what mass production was. There's an underlying substrate. Here's what you do. Other firms saw it and said, oh, I don't have to make just cars. I can make washing machines. I can make this. That idea moved and basically changed the world. Yeah. And that's what Peoria and Sable's book is all about. That idea was mass production versus craft. So that's an example of recipes in action. Am I accurate?
Yeah.
Do I have it, Professor?
Yeah.
Good, okay, got it. That moves us to national economies. Societies that, and this is something that have your view, and I think you've said, but could be wrong, more people, more ideas.
Yeah.
So this notion that more people is a problem may not be because there maybe more people are depleting the the objects, the resources, but more people might mean more ideas. And the other thing is, as a society, what should societies do and shouldn't they do to generate this idea, formulation, spread, adoption, which you have basically proven drives growth. Ideas are more important than objects.
Yeah.
So more people and societies, if you could address that.
Well, so as I said before, what we saw historically was not just progress that continued, but it was progress that was accelerating. The rate of growth was increasing over time. And we can infer this in ancient history because the main constraint was how much food you could produce, and how much food you could produce limited how many people there were. So there was this kind of virtuous cycle during much of prehistory where the more people there were, the more ideas that were discovered about how to produce food, the more food you could produce, and then with more people you got more ideas, and we just see this super exponential. Exponential growth would be growth at a constant rate. We see this super exponential growth in population and the total amount of food that humans could take advantage of over most of history. Now, the thing we have to learn in the modern context is how to get the advantages of more ideas from more people.
Can I interject one thing?
Yeah.
You mentioned here in notes, herding, learning, U.S. autos in the 70s. And so these are notes from yesterday's conversation. I want to make sure you don't forget them.
Yeah, well.
I don't know where they come in.
Sure, well.
In terms of economic growth, national growth.
When you tell me to. So on herding, herding is this pattern where we learn lots of ideas, valuable ideas, by watching what other people do. So we all tend to conform in many ways. And on some dimensions, conformity is really good. Like, you wouldn't want to have a diversity of opinions about whether we drive on the left or drive on the right. You know, like that's one where, you know, diversity is not a good idea. But conformity can actually reinforce our natural tendency to think, well, the world is just going to be the way it's always been. Nothing new will really happen, and there's nothing left to discover. So we need to encourage a bit of diversity in terms of the search paths. Encourage people to go out and try different things. And in organizations, encourage like let the 100 flowers bloom and see which ones actually work. So herding is one of the mechanisms that tends to slow us down. Diversity, individual initiative, and then competition can speed things up. That was herding. What was?
Just I'm getting back to broadly, and is in terms of what do we want to do as a society? You're saying don't conform around one set of ideas, broaden the diverse pattern. You talked about the U.S. auto industry example, Chinese EVs today, competition and learning from others, and learning from experience. We talked about learning as the byproduct of work. So just broadly, society advancing. What should we be doing? And it relates to firms as well.
But this reminds me of something I wanted to say that was kind of teed up by Nick's remarks. If it's so easy to take like a good idea like cross-docking and then you just replicate it across all the warehouses in the country, why is it the case that some countries are so much wealthier and prosperous than other countries? And in fact, why don't ideas flow across national boundaries? This, I think, is one of the biggest failures of the post-war system. And the agencies like the World Bank, where I worked for a while, that are supposed to help every country quickly catch up with what's going on in the richest countries, we really failed in that mission. China's one of the few big success cases. There's the traditional Asian tigers in China, where they did what seems like it should be easy. Just copy what's known, and then you can have a quality of life that's at the frontier. The big puzzle is why it's so hard to get ideas to diffuse. And culture, organizations, lots of things get in the way, regulations too. We still don't have a good handle on this problem, but the growing disparity between the countries that weren't doing better and the countries that were led to this growing pressure for migration flows. We saw that migration flows have been politically disruptive, and I think are a large part of what's behind the rise of the right in Europe. And so the fact that we, and the strategy we always said was, we'll just make them stay where they are to deal with the political concerns, but we'll help them get rich. We never figured out how to help them get rich. And I think this is the big unresolved question that we've got to address. There are billions of people who look at the system that works in a country like the United States and say to themselves, if I lived there, I don't need any kind of a handout, but if I lived there, I could have a better quality of life. And it's pretty natural for them to want to go live there, and it's pretty natural to ask, why can't it be like this here? So that's I think the issue about collective action and organization building and institutions that we need to address. And I think we're going to have to get more clever about thinking about solving this problem, because literally billions of people want what we have, and we've got to figure out a way. And again, this is not something where it's a resource we're giving away. It's not like, bricks of gold or something. It's just a sort of a notion about if you organize things in the right way, people can have a much better quality of life.
If we think about, and this will be maybe a last question before I come to the Center for the Economic Ideas, which you lead at BC, and relate there to what all of this is about around ideas and your focus on technology, which is fascinating. But if we think about this country, the movement of ideas, and your view, I think that this country historically has it right. We generate these codified ideas in the form of patents or cross-docking, and it drives progress. But you've also said, and I think there's a great quote, monopolists make us dumber.
Yeah.
And I think and this isn't the likely quote from a Chicago economist, to worry about that as a concern, but you have concerns now about a monopolist making us dumber with respect to the flow of ideas and the use of ideas.
Yeah. The traditional analysis of what's wrong with a monopolist is that it charges a price that's too high. But I think that misses a lot of the damage that monopolists do. Monopolists often find that the best way for them to make an additional dollar of profit is to do something that might cause, say, $10 of loss for everyone else. So the issue isn't that we're shifting a bigger piece of the pie to the monopolists. The problem is that we're making the pie smaller because they're doing things that are profitable for them but harmful for society. And so making people dumber. This is why I'm so hostile to this advertising model. Somebody like Facebook, they make more money by selling more ads if you stay on Facebook longer. So they have found a whole bunch of ways to manipulate people to help you stay engaged. If they made you pay a subscription price, you might say, well, I really don't like my time online at Facebook, and I'm not going to pay the subscription. They might offer different services, like Spotify does, if they had to justify a subscription price. But the ad model basically makes people stupid because it makes them pay attention to or give up control over the information that they consume. Another more subtle example of this is that from my teaching, I realized that mobile devices and the web have deprived the newest generation of any understanding of what it is that we refer to when we talk about a file system tree on a desktop operating system. There's a structure to how we find all the files on a desktop system. And if you grew up with DOS and so forth, you kind of have some intuition for that. These students have no idea about any structure to the files that run their devices. I describe it a little bit like my dog, where the elevator door opens and the dog's like, oh, okay, this is a different place. and then we get back on, we go someplace else, the door opens again, the dog goes, oh, this is a different place. The dog doesn't understand, well, we're actually, there's a relationship. We're in a higher level above the one. We could take the stairs, get down to the lower one. And when somebody just pushes a link, it's like, oh, this is a different place. And they hit a GUI button, they hit a link. And they have no notion of the file system tree. Unfortunately, you really have to understand what a tree is if you want to develop software. And I now think we're all becoming accidental developers. If you want to do anything clever with software, if you want to use AI, if you're just turning on an application, like I'm turning on Word and I'm going to write a letter, you don't need to know about the file system. But if you're going to do anything more clever, like let's set up a system where we can have some task lists that we share amongst everybody on the team and everybody can experiment with them. And we got all this power now of flexible systems that let us write software to do this. If you don't know what the file tree is, you're really at a huge disadvantage. So I think that the way that these new devices have deprived people of an understanding of the file system tree, it was just sort of an accidental side effect, but it does leave them at a disadvantage. And I spend a lot of time trying to fill in this gap when I'm trying to teach them about how to run one of these devices securely. So if I made a note to myself after we talked. I wrote down 3 letters to remember. LBD, learning by doing. An enormous amount of what we learn comes as a side effect of the other things that we're doing and producing. We measure the other things we're doing. We don't always measure the learning, and so we tend to undervalue and underappreciate the importance of the learning that's going on. But we should think about every activity in society as being something which is both like producing output, like you're caring for patients, but you're also becoming a better physician because you learn by paying attention to what happened in this particular case. So if we thought of every activity as having that potential for a side effect of additional learning, then you start to say things like, well, look, using a mobile device isn't having those positive learning benefits that we might get, and maybe there's a different way to configure UIs or different structures for devices where they're both, you can do what you want to do and you learn as you do it. So if we could stay focused on that as society and insist that firms deliver on that and not just distract us into stupefaction as we doom scroll and watch ads, then we'd be better off.
A comment. One is learning by doing. At the heart of it is, in terms of a firm, what taught us this was Toyota.
Yeah.
Ford said separation and mass production was all about separation of thought and planning and execution. So for Ford, the workers do, they don't think, the managers think. The genius of Toyota was, no, the workers are actually learning while they make the car. And the genius of total quality is put them in teams, ask them how to run it better, how to do the assembly line, how to deliver the parts better, and you'll make a better car. They capture the learning by doing that's happening. I spent a week in Toyota City. They still get thousands and thousands of suggestions from the assembly line workers, from what they learn, on how to actually improve the process of making a car. That simple notion basically put Detroit out of business, and we had to bail out Detroit because Toyota made cars that didn't break down, and in Detroit in the 60s and early 70s, their cars, and that's the learning by doing in a huge way where they invented the whole quality. That's learning by doing. Paul's translating it to knowledge professionals who have to be learning by doing, or they're atrophying too, getting dumber. Now, one thought, I made a comment actually I think captured your attention, where I said that the PC and the laptop is the tool of today's professional, knowledge professionals. They carry it, that's how they do their job. Without the stuff on that laptop, they wouldn't be effective. And that's where a lot of learning, and that brings you to the center of economic of ideas. You're doing a lot around the tools on the laptop to help knowledge professionals
Yeah.
better work with ideas, better to share ideas so that we come up with the ideas, but if they're stuck and we can't move them,
Yeah.
then they're not going to reach the potential those ideas have. So
So-
let's go there, and also what you're doing in your incredible center around that,
Yeah.
helping us as professionals use that tool to move our ideas forward.
Yeah, but let me just point to a kind of a complexity here. Like, where do ideas sit? Where do they live? Well, you could have ideas that are like codified in a set of letters in a document that you could read, or they could be bits in some software that you run. But a lot of ideas, most of them, have to actually get translated into connections between neurons in somebody's brain. If you get the right patterns of connections, then you got the right documents or the right devices to use. And it's the kind of the neurons in the brain combined with the external things which work together and produce something valuable. So we have to simultaneously be thinking about how do we codify it so you could send it to somebody else, they could read it, but also how do we get it from the written page into their brain. And reading works, lecturing works a little bit, but doing, I keep finding more and more as I try to teach about computers with young people, lecturing to them about how to use a computer is a really dumb thing to do. I need to get them to use the computer, not lecture to them about what it's like to use the computer. So we got to push forward on both how do we codify so we can share, but how do we also build these experiences where people are constantly, absorbing new insights about how to use things.
Could you comment briefly, and then we'll open up for some questions. What's your center doing in terms of a couple of the specific tools? You work with one of our professors, Sam Ransbotham.
Yep.
You and him have been terrific. Grace is a terrific collaborator. You're working with people in Europe. So what are the few things you're doing in the center to kind of help professionals codify, move ideas, avoid them being trapped by these simple operating systems and not be dumbed down?
Well, when I look back, when the PC revolution took place, academics and others, basically, we gave responsibility for designing file formats to two companies, Adobe and Microsoft. So Microsoft created the Word document, and Adobe created the PDF. So all knowledge that we codify and share is basically transmitted in Word and increasingly PDFs. There were disadvantages with both of those file formats. They both created, for example, greater security risks because making sure those documents could run code was beneficial to the models of both companies, but it made them vectors for malware. And it wasn't what any of us wanted in our documents. So my ambition with the center is I want to create a new file format that replaces the PDF, but which also has this capacity to run software, but where we make it transparent that it's running the software. So I can send you not just a paper, but with some math and some words, but I send you a paper with math and words and some code. And I say, if you run the code, here's what it will show you. You get it, you can run the code, and you can actually see. So we turn the malware vector into the kind of communication.
That's the actual idea, that code, the codified recipe. In Ford's term, it was written down, but that's the core of the idea. It's not just the software, but how it's all put together so I can look at it, I can move it, I can improve the idea.
And part of it is that different ideas can be codified in words best. Think about poetry or emotions. Some ideas can be codified in math. It turns out there are a lot of things you can codify in software and let somebody else run it and say, this is what I mean. And the software is the language that communicates it. And I think this is the big change we're going to see in research and a lot of society is the use of code, not just to do things, but to communicate with each other. But I came in with that mission, let's build the file format of the future, and we're on track to do that. But we've realized in parallel that there's this issue of making sure everybody's got the human capital, the neural connections to absorb and use this stuff. So we're getting a lot more focused on how do we get everybody up to speed to use this. Yeah.
And in terms of the coding, it's not just coding for the job, but it's disciplining of codifying, articulating your ideas. Before you go to Claude and have it develop the code, it's good to know what's going on. And I'll say, and then we'll turn over, we're the only business school I can find in the country that has a required full course in Python coding. Very rigorous to get these kids to, it's almost like Back to the Future. I had coding, Dartmouth Basic in 1965, they invented BASIC to code. We're back to that. It's a course in logic and discipline and thinking and creating ideas. And that relates to how their professionals have to think specifically. So Paul has this big idea about national growth. He's driving it into software so professionals can codify their ideas, move their ideas, trust their ideas. We didn't get into that. But let's open it up for questions at any level for Paul. Any from the audience? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I found your comments about advertising-based marketing to be fascinating, and I think I agree with you. But a thought had occurred to me on the whole topic of idea exchange, in that how much of it is influenced by organizations or societies' attitudes regarding failure. In other words, certain political systems, you can't fail. They don't want you to fail. They don't allow you to fail. They restrict that type of freedom. And I'm wondering how much of that is an issue between nations, among nations, and even with organizations, in your opinion.
Yeah. I think that there's these kind of simple dichotomies of the market works, the government doesn't work, are just way too simple. There are other factors like culture that can, there can be a cultural dimension to how risk is perceived, how failure is perceived. And different cultures could either encourage more innovation or discourage it. Openness to foreign ideas, openness to new possibilities. These are all, you see variations across groups at the society level and smaller level in their openness to new ideas. And the context matters as well. You put people like these young people where it's a life or death struggle in Ukraine, you know, a lot of young people start working incredibly hard to figure out ways to improve this option of the drone, which at first didn't really seem that promising, the little, you know, like battery-powered drone, but now has become the primary force on the battlefield. So the thing I was trying to say in the very beginning when I started this work is like, it's up to us. If we do the right things, we can discover a lot of different things. Unfortunately, do the right things is kind of a collective activity, not just a personal one. It isn't just like have a good, you know, to-do list, but it's like, it's good to be part of a group of people who all support those things and can share ideas. Like in the story about the, you know, the small workshops where everybody could recombine ideas and so forth. So it's a question not just about how do we change our own lives, but it's like how do we change our collective activities to get more of this growth.
I'm going to just drive down, if I may, from his macroeconomist view to a strategy professor. 3 anecdotes. From 1998 to about 2004, I came in 2005. I was at IMD. I ran their global MBA program. I started it. We would travel for about a week and a half to Silicon Valley. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from New Jersey. It was a wake-up call, the attitude there. And what we learned visiting companies over and over with 40 or 50 young, you know, executives, 30, 35 years old, they had this notion where failure was a badge of honor, that they wanted to fail and experiment. And that was not the world I lived in, where you don't want to fail. So that cultivated, I think, there an incredible idea culture. And it just was what I saw there then. I don't know, I haven't been back. Some of you lived there, but that was striking. The second thing was when I was there, I started working with a firm called IDEO. It's the world's biggest design firm. And I would take students there. I've done some engagements in Switzerland with them and in Europe, consulting engagements. And they have a very idea-sharing combination. It very relates to what Paul said. So I read Paul's stuff. I'm going to Silicon Valley. I go to a firm. It's all connected. The value of these ideas, recipes, how they move, how they share. The third anecdote is Amazon's an amazing firm. I spend more money on Amazon than it's unbelievable, than anybody in my family. Drives them crazy. I buy everything on Amazon. If I don't go to another store in my life, I'll be happy. Except I like buying food. my problem in life. Bezos, in his early years, wrote a letter along with every annual report. Those letters are great to read. You can find them online. I have them if you want them. In an early letter, he wrote about failure, and he wrote about experimentation and how important it was at Amazon. And he had a great line: I want Amazon to be the greatest place in the world to fail. So he understood instinctively, and he said in an interview, I've made billions of dollars of mistakes. Petco.com, the Fire phone. It's this failure that generates new ideas. That's the learning by doing issue. You learn, you fail, you succeed, you're still learning. So your failure question, I think, is really important in firms, in society, in how we approach things, and how we educate students. If they feel they can't fail and experiment, we're going to get to that conformity point that Paul talked about, and we're not going to generate new ideas in your companies, in your department, in your society. I think it translates amongst levels of analysis. And as a strategy professor, I find what Paul's talking about very, very relevant to firms. I've worked in Nestle, an amazing brand company globally, located down the street from Lausanne when I lived there. It wasn't an idea factory, but it's a powerhouse. But okay, so different strokes, different horses for different courses. Some firms, you preserve your ideas, don't mess them up. You have the recipe, they're brands. But I don't think that's going to drive progress. So Paul's work is very relevant. And your failure point is very important. Without failure, or the willingness to fail, you will not generate new ideas. And you won't generate what Paul's looking for. Questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I think in the business concept, sometimes we have way too many new ideas that we just fail to really prioritize, especially when there's limited resource. I'm just curious, do you have any comments around that?
Oh, I think you're exactly right. I mean, Andy was kind of suggesting this too, the failure. When you start to think about all the possible ways that we could do things differently, or all the possible ways to recombine things, the possibilities are just explosive. So what you got to do is find the few that generate some value compared to all the others that are just worthless. So in this exploration process, you have to be ruthless about shutting down most things you try, which don't work, but keeping going the few that survive. And it's hard to keep that kind of like balance where you're always evaluating a lot of things, but yet you're always shutting down a lot of the ones that don't work out and running with the few that are the most promising at the moment.
I think that's true, and related to business, I'll comment I think you need to know where you're going, exactly what your goals are, because that way you can assess which ideas contribute to those goals. Because first of all, most ideas, including mine, are not good ideas. So you have to be willing to tolerate what's a bad idea, but can we combine that with other ideas? Is it a core of most ideas are incomplete. You got to fill them out and tolerate that. But I'll just relate to the Carroll School. From day one, there were 3 objectives. Best undergraduate business school in the country, faculty excellence in teaching and research. Those were 2 parallel goals. And the third was competitive MBA. We're never going to be a grad. We're never going to be Harvard. We're never going to be, Wharton. That's not the deal. But those 3 then in 2005 are the same as now. We welcome all ideas to get there. So I think you need a North Star, how to assess which ideas are valuable, which aren't, and tolerate and reward people who even come up with ideas that aren't great and say, keep coming up with ways to do better. You know, a lot of it, I think, is ideas happen, and I think universities struggle with this because we're not in capital markets. There's nothing pushing us, frankly, in the world to do better. That's why the motto at BC of ever to excel is so important. Because we don't have share price. We got 45,000 kids applying to BC. The economic model of BC is a juggernaut. What has to drive our improvement is our leadership attitude, get better every day. And I think that's true in companies. You've got to instill that. That will drive new ideas. If people aren't trying to get better, they're not. You know, Jim Collins wrote these books, great books. He had a line, good is the enemy of great. Good is the enemy of great, because people get complacent. When that happens, I look at Paul's work, no new ideas. Because complacency, if you want to be great, you're going to come up with new ideas. So I think that's very relevant for companies, more ideas, way to filter them. You need a goal, and you got to have ambition. And I think they're all tied together strategically. And Paul's work is seminal in that ideas are the driver of success and growth. Those codified ideas, far more than objects. And that's why, as a strategy professor, his stuff is so important.
And we got to be tolerant of like discussions about things that sound stupid and then may actually be stupid, but you know, we ought to at least encourage them. Like one of the things I've been thinking about is kids really want to prove that they would be good candidates to be in the school, to join the school at that admissions process. What if we just said, well, one of the things we're going to look at is your demonstrated ability to navigate the file tree on your desktop computer. If that were an important part of getting in here, a bunch of them would figure out how the file tree works. It's not that hard. Now, well, there's other things you might want them to learn, but I think coding is so important. I would push this one. I probably won't win the argument in the school to make that the critical admissions characteristic. But if we were going to do it, then what we do is we create a whole bunch of teaching materials to make sure that everybody could qualify to get into the school by teaching them themselves this stuff. It's not as though everything we help them learn has to come in classes that we offer. It could be other channels. So one way or the other, we want to make more people feel empowered and in control of these really powerful tools that we're developing.
One last question in the back.
Hi, I'm an old-time BC MBA grad 48 years ago in finance. I'm wondering what effect AI has on the development of ideas for us.
Yeah. There's this joke which is kind of based on a misunderstanding about the question about what about the revolution that was posed to, who was it? It wasn't Deng Xiaoping, it was Zhou Enlai, right? And Kissinger asked Zhou Enlai, what did you think were about the outcome of the revolution? And well, too soon to tell. So anyway, that remark, too soon to tell. It's very early in the process on AI, but I started working on this idea. We need to take control of the file format that's going to have software and run software, because we got to make it secure and we got to make it an effective tool for communicating with each other. I started this in 2018. So AI wasn't even on the horizon at that point. We thought about some things we haven't talked about here, like security and like authentication. How do you prove who is the person who's the author of this document? The authentication issues are becoming much more important, because you want to know who is the author. Was this a person, or is it just an AI? And in particularly, is it an AI that was paid by somebody as a third party who's trying to influence me to do something that is not in my interest? So the AI has both raised the stakes, and the other thing it's done is it's raised the return to knowledge. The people who know the most about software get the most value out of AI. The people who know the least are going to just get left behind and maybe abused by it. So it just further adds to the urgency, I think, of helping everybody stay on top of a set of technologies and tools that are evolving really very rapidly.
AI. Boy, if you ever want to know, grab one of us professors or dean types and how we're trying to deal with AI and our students and keeping them away from AI during assessments. Blue book sales are skyrocketing, but for small assignments, learn AI, but we have to test their foundational knowledge. So we spend a lot of time in the school talking about AI and learning. So we're going to have lunch next. I think that's Dan.
I thought
Yeah.
one thing I want to come back
You
to.
do oral exams.
We don't want to ask a question like, you invented this chemical industry. Are chemicals good? That's not a very helpful question. What you want to ask is something like, well, are the CFCs good? No, those are bad. Are these other chemicals good? Oh yeah, those ones are okay. I think the same is going to be true of AI. There are a lot of ways to use AI and code that could be beneficial. There are a lot that could be very harmful. Our challenge as society is both to discover all the ones that could be good, but also to say no to the ones that are going to be harmful. And I'm more worried right now about our ability to say no.
Yep.
We could probably spend a whole session on AI and the impact on education, and it would be fascinating, but we've run out of time. It's not lunch yet. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back with Mark Seidner and Rich Bernstein to talk about liquidity versus fundamentals. How about a round of applause for Paul and Andy?